Hello, I'd like to go over the rules of probability. The first rule, uh, the numbering is going to be a little bit different than what's in the book here, so I'm going to make up my own order of rules here. But the first rule is the basic formula for computing probabilities, and so the formula is the probability of some event happening. I'll just call it A. Usually, capital letters are used to indicate events. So the probability of some event A happening is equal to the number of ways uh, that event A can occur. Number of ways event A can occur divided by all possible outcomes. And that would be all the number of outcomes in that sample space. All right, so for a quick example here, let's say you have a bag of, let's say you have 10 marbles in the bag. And you pick one at random. And let's say out of these 10 marbles, let's say let's say you have 3 green marbles. Okay, so let's say that G is the event that you choose a green marble. So the probability of picking a green marble at random is equal to all the ways you can get a green marble. There's 3 ways you can get a green marble because there's 3 marbles out of all the possible outcomes. And there's 10 marbles altogether, so that's 10 outcomes. So the probability of getting a green is 3 out of 10. You can leave the answer in fraction form. If you prefer, you can convert that to a decimal, 0.3, or if you prefer, convert it to percentage. Move decimal point 2 places, 1, 2, 30%. All are 3 legitimate ways of giving the answer to any probability question. Okay, so that's rule number 1. That's the basic formula for probability. Now, rule number 2 is the direct consequence of rule 1, and that is any probability must be between 0 and 1. Okay, this is a direct consequence of the formula, because the formula here, this bottom number, all possible outcomes, is always going to be greater than or equal to the number of ways the event can occur. For example, in the marble example, the number of green marbles is only 3, but there's 10 marbles all together in the bag. So the total number of marbles is always going to be more or possibly equal to the number of particular marbles that you're interested in. And so for that reason, you always get a number between 0 and 1. Now, by the way, if you get a 0, you calculate some probability and you get a 0. 0 just means the event is impossible. Okay, so for example, what is the probability of a purple elephant with yellow stripes crashing through the ceiling of this room right now? All right, I would say that probability is equal to 0. All right, if you get a 1, that means it's guaranteed to happen. It will happen for sure, whatever that event is. What is the probability that the sun rises tomorrow? Well, that probability would be equal to 1. Okay, so that's rule number 2. Rule number 3 is the addition rule here. So if you have 2 events, I'll say if events A and events B, we'll always use capital letters for events here. So if events A and B are disjoint, or in the workbook sometimes they use the word mutually exclusive. Same idea. It just means if you have 2 events where there's no overlap between the events, so they cannot both happen at the same time. That's what disjoint means. So if A and B are disjoint or mutually exclusive, then the probability of A or B happening is equal to the probability of A plus the probability of B. All right, a quick example. Let's do another marble example here. So let's say that there's, you have a bag of 10 marbles again. And so we already figured out the probability of getting a green marble is 0.3, or 3 out of 10. And let's say also that there's some red marbles. Let's say probability of a red marble, let's say, is 0.4. Let's say you have 4 out of 10 marbles are red. So we want to know what's the probability that you get a green or a red marble. So the probability of green or red is equal to the sum of those two individual probabilities. So it's 0.3 plus 0.4, which is equal to 0.7 altogether. Which makes sense, because if you have 3 green marbles and 4 red marbles, you've got 7 marbles that are either green or red. And so that's 7 out of 10. Now this is assuming that there's no marbles that are both green and red, like it's somehow green and red striped or something. Then you can just add them together. All right, so that's rule 3. If A and B are disjoint, then probability of A or B is equal to probability of A plus probability of B. Okay, rule 4. This says the sum of all probabilities is 1. You could call this the something must happen rule. Something must happen. So if you roll dice, or if you flip coins, or draw marbles, or whatever you do, you add up all the probabilities, and it has to equal 1. For example, back to the marble example here. Let's say that probability of green is 0.3, probability of a red is, let's say, 0.4, and let's say you have one more color. Let's say you have white. You have some white marbles. Let's say that's 0.3. So then it all has to add up to 1.0. If it didn't all add up to 1.0, then it means you left something out. And so that's why it has to add up to 1, because a 1 means it's guaranteed to happen. That's why we say it's a something must happen rule. Now, the same caveat as with the last rule here. The events must be disjoint. If you have some overlap, then they will add up to more than 1. But if they're disjoint, it all adds up to 1. Okay, next rule. This is a consequence of the last rule here, the probability of not A. In other words, the probability that something doesn't happen is equal to 1 minus the probability that it happens. All right, and this is because if everything adds up to 1, then if something doesn't happen, then that's everything except for the stuff that happened. And so you just subtract from 1. Here's an example. Let's say that R is the event that it rains tomorrow. And let's say you listen to the weather report. The meteorologist says there's a 60% chance of rain. So probability of rain is 60%. You could say 0.6. All right, so that means probability that it doesn't rain, probability of not rain is 0.4. Just subtract 1 minus 0.6. Now, a lot of times, this is easier to do in the context of percentages. So you could say if the probability of rain is 60%, same number, just in percentage form instead of decimal form, then the probability of not rain is equal to 40%. It's just easier to subtract from 100 because I don't know, it's just easier that way. All right, so you could say the probability of not A would be 100% minus the probability of A if you're in percent form. Okay, last rule. This is the multiplication rule. So the probability of event A happening and event B happening is equal to the probability of A times the probability of B. Now, I'm not going to use x for times because that can be confused with the variable x. So I'll use a little dot here for times. All right. Now, this is assuming A and B are independent. Events A and events B are independent. Now, what does that mean? The word independent means that one event does not influence the other event. So, for example, flipping coins is independent because if you flip one coin, it in no way affects the results of the next coin. All right. So, for example, let's say, well, let's do a coin flipping example here. So, the probability of getting heads if you flip one coin is 1/2, assuming that the two sides are equally likely to show up. So, what's the probability of 2 heads in a row? So, in other words, what's the probability of the first coin being heads, or the first time you toss the coin you get heads, and then the second time you toss the coin you get heads? So, the probability of H and H, well, that's just equal to 1/2 times 1/2, which is equal to 1/4. Now, quick refresher on multiplying fractions, you just multiply across. 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4. And that's it for all the rules of probability that we'll use in this class. Quick recap here. Number 1 is the formula. All the ways something happens divided by all the outcomes. Rule 2, any probability is between 0 and 1. 3 is the addition rule. Probability of A or B equals the sum of the probabilities. Rule 4, everything adds up to 1. Rule 5, subtract from 1 or 100% to find out the probability of something not happening. And rule 6, the multiplication rule, probability of A and B is equal to probability of A times probability of B. And that's it for the rules.